is the 65th anniversary of New Life Church. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you enjoy this trip through time. In order to understand the history of New Life Church, you have to go back, way back.
Okay, maybe not quite that far back. That's getting closer, but still a little too far back. Okay, that's close enough. Let's start there. The Great Migration westward in the 1840s brought thousands of pioneers with their covered wagons from the Midwest to the end of the Oregon Trail, and many Baptists were numbered among them. In response, the American Baptist Home Mission Society, headquartered in New York, dispatched two experienced Baptist missionaries to the Oregon country, Reverend Hezekiah Johnson and Reverend Ezra Fisher. Each was given $400 to equip a wagon to bring their family and paid a year's salary of $200 in advance. The two families, Reverend Johnson, his wife Eliza, and their 7 children, and Reverend Fisher, with his wife and 4 children, left St. Joseph, Missouri with the New Immigration Company on May 20th, 1845. At the very beginning of their journey, their faith was severely tested. They refused to travel on Sunday unless it was absolutely necessary, choosing instead to hold worship services and get some needed rest. And while all did not agree with them on this issue, they were much respected for their consistency. Of Brother Fisher, one of the company said,
"He manifested more of the true spirit of Christ than any other man with whom I was acquainted."
6 months after leaving Missouri, the families completed their journey, arriving in Oregon City during a snowstorm on December 7th, 1845. Reverend Fisher soon assumed the pastorate of a small group meeting in a house in West Union, just west of Hillsboro. Reverend Johnson and his family settled near Oregon City, and soon he began preaching at private homes in outlying neighborhoods. On July 4th, 1847, Reverend Johnson officially organized a church at Oregon City with just 7 members, and soon after secured 2 lots on 13th and Main from John McLaughlin on which to build a meeting house. Despite being in poor health with what was referred to as camp fever at the time, working mostly by himself, cleared the trees and erected a 20 by 30-foot building fitted with rough wooden benches for pews, thus completing the first Baptist meeting house west of the Rockies. Throughout its early years, the church was subjected to floods and fluctuating membership due to the call of the California goldfields. Gold had been discovered in 1848, and many dropped everything to head south for their dream of riches. Nevertheless, the fledgling church continued to grow due to the courageous pioneering spirit of Johnson and the support of American Baptist Home Mission Society back in New York. In their letters back to the society, Reverend Johnson and Reverend Fisher speak of the growing prospects of the country, their needs, and their zeal to labor in various ways as may be necessary.
"We are by no means discouraged, but on the whole have a growing conviction that we never were in a more responsible station, and we are often strengthened and encouraged by the reflection that we have the prayers and sympathies of many, very many Christian friends, especially when they bow together around the throne of our exalted Redeemer."
Early Baptists as a group were devout pioneers with a deep respect for religion. The services were enthusiastic with shouting and noisy demonstrations which few pastors would suppress. Cultural, political, and religious battles being fought back east often were at the heart of heated debates in the early churches. The country was on the brink of a civil war primarily due to the issue of slavery, and emotions were running high. Reverend Johnson, however, was seldom attacked concerning his beliefs, as he was generally regarded as a pretty tough case to handle. In advocating his views or in opposing others, he was not always choice in his language and could be rough and blunt, but he never swerved or flinched in the advance of principle. He would stand for what he believed to be God's truth, even if he stood alone. Within a few years, the always evangelical Baptist Church at Oregon City was holding mission services and Sunday schools in a number of surrounding areas, including Clackamas, Gladstone, Park Place, Mount Pleasant, Kanema, Redland, Barton, Logan, Highland, Willamette, and West Lynn. and there were already 4 other Baptist congregations in the Willamette Valley that had constructed their own church buildings. These were at Yamhill, Rickreall, Turner, and Eugene. There was no early-day denomination as active as the Baptists in planting churches in the Oregon Territory. By the late 1860s, the Baptist Church at Oregon City was outgrowing its small wood-framed meeting house at 13th and Main. The structure was also in poor condition due to the devastating floods it had endured over the years. In 1871, the congregation constructed a new church building just 4 blocks south at the corner of 9th and Main. This much larger and more elaborate structure cost less than $5,000 to build. In 1894, the church did a major remodel of the building, including enlarging the auditorium to seat 400. Then in 1940, primarily due to the widening of Highway 99E, the congregation sold its church building at 9th and Main and purchased property for a new church just a few blocks away at 9th and John Adams. The old building was demolished a few years later, and a U.S. bank now stands on the property. Construction of the new church at 9th and John Adams began later that year, but it soon became evident that the original cost estimate was far too low, and there was not enough money left to finish the building. The congregation decided to move into the unfinished gymnasium, and on June 1st, 1941, held their first worship service in the new building. It was also a memorable day for the congregation for another reason. On that same day, their pastor of 12 years, Dr. Frank Lehman, submitted his resignation, effective immediately, to undertake similar work in West Lynn, where a Baptist church was to be established. During Dr. Lehman's ministry in Oregon City, he had received more than 600 new members into the church. Began his ministry in 1929. The church was considerably in debt, but largely due to his effort, the debt was retired in less than a year. On Sunday, June 8th, 1 week after his resignation from Oregon City Baptist, Dr. Lehman led a group made up exclusively of parishioners from his former church in worship services in the West Lynn City Hall. United in Christian love and recognizing the need of a Baptist church in the growing West Lynn community, the assembly was the seeds of West Lynn Baptist Church. The West Lynn area had grown rapidly since the turn of the century. In this photo from approximately 1890, the area on the other side of the suspension bridge over the Willamette is just being logged off. Even in this 1894 photo, only a few buildings are visible. By 1936, the area looked quite different. West Lynn had been an incorporated city for 23 years and had a population of close to 2,000 residents. The area was ready for a Baptist church of its own. The week following their first worship service in the West Lynn City Hall, the new church was officially organized with more than 75 charter members. Curiously enough, one of the first orders of business was passing a motion requiring the pastor to give 6 months' notice before resigning. A preliminary draft of the church constitution was also adopted, and the members extended a unanimous call to Dr. Frank Lehman to fill their pulpit for an indefinite term. Also, at the first business meeting, the members voted to send a letter to Oregon City Baptist requesting withdrawal of those wishing to drop their memberships. They also decided to send a letter to the local newspapers defending their position to leave the church. The church's first expenditures were also authorized at that meeting: $100 for the pastor's monthly salary, $26.22 for songbooks, and $10 for a piano. A place to meet on Sundays was not going to be a problem since an agreement had already been reached with the West Lynn City Council that their Sunday school and church services could be held in the City Hall until a more desirable meeting place could be acquired. On October 29, 1941, articles of incorporation were filed with the State Incorporation Commissioner, making the new church an official non-profit corporation. But on December 7th, the U.S. was thrust into World War II, and the lives of all Americans changed forever.
interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, thousands of American men and women swelled the military ranks by volunteering for service. A number of members from this congregation served their country in this great conflict. In the Portland area, as in many other cities, thousands went to work in the shipyards, learning skills they never thought they would need as civilians. Many women were taught to weld to keep up with the tremendous demand for ships. The effort was consuming all the resources the country could produce, and conservation of war-related items was mandatory. Rationing of common items such as coffee, sugar, meat, canned foods, butter, rubber, oil, and gasoline was in effect. At the newly formed Westland Baptist, the church began setting aside funds to purchase property and construct their own church building. The minutes of the July 1942 church business meeting showed that $377 was then in the church's building fund, and a motion was passed to use it to purchase war bonds. Although the bonds yielded a mere 2.9% return after a 10-year maturity, their purchase by Americans was critical to supplying enough cash for the war effort. Within a year, the church had purchased $1,700 more in war bonds. The shortage of heating oil during the war years resulted in many church meetings being held in member homes, avoiding the high cost of heating the much larger meeting area in the city hall. While conducting church services in temporary quarters, the members were very happily surprised on New Year's Day of 1942 to receive the deed to a building site in the Bolton district. This very substantial gift, so needed at the time, was presented by two of the beloved charter members, Mr. and Mrs. James McKillican. The following week, a church member was authorized to use the building site for a victory garden until a church building could be built. The government was asking all citizens to plant vegetable gardens, which they termed victory gardens, to enable more supplies to be shipped to our troops. The call to plant a victory garden was answered by nearly 20 million Americans. During the next few years, much prayer and study relative to the best location for the new church building were done. Finally, and with the approval of Mr. and Mrs. McKillican, the Bolton property was sold for $750, with the proceeds of the sale to be used to purchase property at a more suitable location. Soon after the sale was finalized, in October of 1944, Franklin T. Griffith, a prominent local attorney and businessman, offered to donate a building site to the church, allowing the church to pick from a number of properties he owned in the area. After much discussion, the church selected 4 lots across from Westland High School. By 1946, after having met in City Hall for almost 5 years, the church was getting more anxious than ever to have its own house of worship. But when the building committee made a cost study of the plans, it became evident that the church would be forced to postpone building for the time being because of the post-war inflationary construction costs. It was then that the idea of purchasing an army chapel was seriously considered. Due to the closing of the army post at Camp Adair near Corvallis, 23 prefabricated army chapels were offered for sale, with the provision the structures be used as memorials, shrines, or for religious purposes. On a cold day in January of 1947, the building committee and their families packed their lunch and went to Camp Adair to view the chapels. After eating their lunch in a cold, vacated Army mess hall, the building committee examined all the available chapels and selected the most desirable building. On completion of negotiations, the chapel was purchased for a sum of $900, and on February 12, 1947, the job of dismantling, moving, and reconstructing the chapel on the church lot was given to an Oregon City contractor, Mark Dodge. Before the chapel could be constructed on the church lot, the church members spent many days of hard work bulldozing the ground in preparation for a full basement to be constructed beneath the building. One of these faithful workers was the petite Mrs. George Phillips of West Lynn, wife of an excavator who furnished and operated the bulldozer, removing many tons of large rock. During the rainy month of February, the chapel was dismantled, shipped down the river, and placed on the church lot. It required a great deal of faith to believe that the dismantled parts could be reconstructed, adding a baptistry and a full basement at a total cost of $18,000. After 6 years of prayer, generous giving, and much hard work, the members realized their dream of having their own sanctuary when dedication services were held on July 13, 1947. Because of the chapel's military background, a number of military personnel were asked to take prominent roles in the evening ceremony. One of 3 dedication services held that day. James Moffat, a member of the church who recently served in the United States Navy, gave an interesting description of the building and its military background. One speaker vividly recalled how the chapel, during its 4 years of service at Camp Adair, had touched the lives of thousands of soldiers, some of whom failed to return. A plaque was then presented to the church inscribed with the names of 16 local men who had died in the war, memorializing the importance of its former use. Identical chapels from Camp Adair were eventually sold to be used for a memorial in Silverton, a Catholic church in Lake Oswego, a chapel at Mount Angel College, and a chapel at Hill Military Academy in Rocky Butte. Hill Military Academy later became Judson Baptist College, and finally City Bible Church in 1991. The chapel is still being used by the church to this day. A total of over 1,200 of these chapels were in use by the military at the end of the war, and many of those are still standing today. As the church membership grew and the Sunday school attendance increased, additional facilities were needed in order for the church to grow spiritually and to carry out their Christian education. In 1951, the church secured a loan from Benjamin Franklin Federal Savings and Loan to add a 3-story educational wing to the church. An Oregon City contractor constructed the addition, excluding the electrical wiring, plumbing, and interior finish, for the sum of $8,000. With the assistance of men from the church working nights and Saturdays, the building shell was completed by the end of 1951. Soon after the shell was completed, many members, both men and women, generously donated their time and money to complete Sunday school rooms in the basement, which were badly needed at the time. The kitchen was also completed early on in the project so that fellowship dinners could be held at the church. Seeing the need of a small chapel to be used for prayer and Bible study services, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Staley bore the entire cost of finishing the Educational Wing Chapel, which was dedicated on November 21, 1951. Folding chairs were used in the chapel temporarily and later replaced by pews, which were constructed by some of the men of the church. During May of 1954, the members voted to acquire a house in Holly Gardens to be used as a church parsonage. The house, located at 5420 Grove Street, was purchased for the sum of $14,500. The purchase was made possible by a generous loan from one of the families in the church. The parsonage was sold 11 years later in 1965. During 1955, the main floor of the educational wing was completed, which included much-needed offices for the staff of the church. In 1958, realizing the recent growth in Sunday school attendance, the trustees designated Tuesday night as work night, and soon the upper floor was also completed, adding even more Sunday school classroom space. Then on April 2nd, 1958, just 4 days before Easter, the church's pastor at the time, Reverend Matthew Ellick, resigned after having served less than 2 years at West Lynn. He, along with a significant number of former members from West Lynn Baptist, then started a church of their own, which they named Calvary Baptist. The congregation soon purchased property just a few miles north in the Robinwood area and constructed a 2-story church building. 10 years later, a separate sanctuary building was constructed adjoining the original building, but by the late 80s, the congregation had dwindled to the point that it was no longer efficient for the remaining members to occupy and maintain the church buildings, and the church was sold to another Christian group. Back at West Lynn Baptist, with the educational wing finally complete, the members of the church selected Frank Pickle, Dick Fisher, Bud Winrick, Andy Christensen, Walter Staley, and Don Van Fleet to work as a committee with the Board of Trustees in making a study of the sanctuary and to bring recommendations for remodeling. In January of 1959, a remodeling and refurnishing program was begun in the sanctuary and foyer of the church. With volunteer labor from the church members and their families, the contractors were able to change what was originally a plain military chapel into a beautiful sanctuary. This was accomplished by moving the baptistry back in order to gain more space in the sanctuary, converting the balcony into a beautiful soundproof nursery equipped with a speaker and restroom facilities, adding windows between sanctuary and the foyer, refinishing the main beams and adding a tile ceiling to the sanctuary, installing mahogany paneling on the walls, and replacing all the original sanctuary window with new arched windows. New pews and pulpit furniture were also purchased as part of the project. On Rededication Sunday, April 26, 1959, the church's pastor at the time, John Henderson, expressed sincere appreciation to all those who had donated their time and talents and contributed financially toward the remodeling and refurnishing of the sanctuary. By early 1965, the church was again looking to expand the building, this time to create additional Sunday school rooms, office space, improved nursery accommodations, additional sanctuary capacity, and a much-needed larger foyer. A groundbreaking ceremony was held on October 25, 1967, with the church's Sunday school superintendent, George Milliken, turning over the first shovelful of soil. Work commenced later that year, and by February of 1968, the 6,000 square foot addition was completed and a dedication service was held. The project also created a large courtyard area between the addition and the original sanctuary building. This was nicely landscaped and maintained until 1989, when the courtyard was enclosed to provide additional foyer space. The most recent upgrade to the church was done in 1998 when, along with other interior improvements, the dark wall paneling in the sanctuary that was installed back in 1959 was covered or painted with lighter colored materials, giving the space a brighter, more up-to-date appearance.
Well, the history of New Life Church is not something to be studied like in a textbook. It's something to be experienced. And that's what I want to invite you to do right now, is experience some of the history of our church. We're going to sing a song that was sung at the dedication of this building. And then we're going to sing a song that was sung in the 70s. And then we're going to sing a song that we just learned a few weeks ago. And these songs will also be accompanied by the instrumentation that the church used throughout that period of time. So I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you really get a feel for what New Life Church has been like through the years. Oh, hey, that was great singing. Oh, man, you sounded good. Hey, I want to welcome you back to the video here, but I don't want you to be confused, because so far the videos looked a lot like it was about a building. But you know and I know that the church isn't about the building at all. It's about people, it's about ministry, it's about mission, it's about outreach, it's about doing and being what God wants us to do and be on this earth.
Churches that we stayed in at night. The Waltons were the popular TV show, and so we would stay in churches and the kids would be on different levels in the rooms, and they would be going, "Good night, Mary Ann," or "Good night, John Boy," and we'd all laugh and get up the next morning and take off on the bus again till we got to Glen Ellen. Forever, ever and ever. And there the kids served working in Vacation Bible School, and they went to different homes and stayed overnight. and we're able to minister even to the people in the homes.
There were never any streets of gold, neither a land will never grow. Just having the Lord in our lives. In the world of darkness, you came along and brought me love.
Well, the universal church is made up of all whoever answered Jesus' salvation call. But still, the church that means the very most to me is a local group of folks who have been set free, and God wants us